Jeff, Farley. I see Lewis, John, Ron. Danger. All right, it's 2:01. Um, I'll get the meeting started. I've done a little roll call by looking at the participants list, and I think we have everyone but Jeff. Do we have Jeff? Is Jeff on? And I missed him. Do you see him, Joel? I don't.
I do not see him.
Okay. Well, it is 2:02, and I would like to respect the work group's time. So I will go ahead and get started with the opening and welcome you all to the, Joel, is this the fourth work group meeting? I think it may be the fourth.
I think that's right.
Work group meeting. And tell you all, those of you all that I have not seen, Happy New Year. Good to see all of you all back. I'm excited. We're coming down the home stretch with the work group. So it's pretty exciting. We have a full agenda today, but as I do before we get started on most of them, I try to remind us of at least our deliverables so we know what our focus is in the meeting itself. And just for reference, because we are trying to prepare for the March preliminary report that is due, I wanted to make sure to cover our deliverables for March, hence how we came up with the agenda for today's meeting, because after today's meeting, we will be spending the majority of our time preparing that report so that it's due on time. We won't have much time at the February meeting in order to make corrections or do things because we want to meet our goal of having it delivered by March. So as a follow-up and a review, our March deliverables require that we do a comprehensive review of the existing truck routes. We identify the main areas of concern in their relation to the existing truck routes. We have completed both of those. We identify the type of streets that should be considered as primary routes, local trucking routes, and restricted routes. We hope to be able to get a closer discussion on that today when you see the map development presentation. Create a map that can be used by vehicle operators in real time. We hope that we get that from the development that Doug is going to show us today. And develop a plan to evaluate existing signage and make necessary adjustments. We also have Greg Karsky here with us from DPW, and he's going to do a presentation on the signage that we currently have and have a discussion around any recommendations that we have as it relates to the current signage and signage that we would like to recommend moving forward, and recommend certain types of vehicles that should be exempt from enforcement by a vehicle height monitoring system. That was deliverable for March. However, we won't be able to meet that deliverable because we have not talked about the vehicle height monitoring system just yet. That will come, of course, after we do the deliverables for March. So we're going to move that one to the final report that will be due later this year. So with that, covering those things to keep them on the forefront of our minds as we go through these presentations, we'll go straight into the agenda. And I'd like to introduce Doug Adams. He's our GSI guru from Public Works and a part of the Public Works team. So Doug, I will turn it over to you to talk about the map in your presentation.
Thank you, DeAndrea, and thank you to the truck restrictions work group for inviting me in to share the information that I put together. Joel, could you allow me to share my screens right now? All I can share is a file or a whiteboard.
Sure. 1 second.
Okay.
Let me know if you're able to now.
Yes, I can now share screens. Good. Thank you. So you're going to see my screen right now, which is a different computer. So I got to jump over. So now are you seeing my email? Are you seeing my email or are you seeing a map?
Yeah, we see your email.
Okay, good. Okay, so what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about how the maps were produced first. And I really want to thank Lewis for helping me out with this and to organize and to talk about the content that was on these maps. So one of the things you can see from the table of contents over here on the left, there's quite a bit of data that went into producing these maps. Most importantly, is this data here, this truck restrictions data. What we did, and I'm going to turn a couple things off just so it doesn't take so long to paint and move around, is we took the regulations from the county and mapped them so that they were available to us to produce this map. And so all we've done at this point is the way they're symbolized right now is by green is based on time, and then the local restriction, and that was actually a suggestion by Lewis to do that the same way that the city did. I was able to contact the city. I've got a point of contact in the Department of Transportation from a GIS perspective, and she gracefully shared the data with their data with me, and then I brought it in, and then using their essentially what was their paper map, their PDF, I was able to re-symbolize the data based the same way that they had talked about. So you'll notice the area inside the city here that looks very much like what that PDF map of the city had. And then, so like I said, I use the same symbology of time restricted is green and local restricted is this light blue color. The one thing I did do is thicken the lines up a little bit in the county to make it easier to see. The other thing that I did was I turned off, remember originally the last time I presented, I had all of the zonings broke up into the different categories so you could see all of that. What I did was I went and simply pulled out the manufacturing zone so that we could see where most of our truck traffic is coming from. Like I said, there's a lot of other data, some of which continues to show on the map. I've got county bridges in here that have weight restrictions. I've got and could put on the map. I don't think they're currently on the maps. Are things like the Info Group, which is a company that we subscribe. We license data from them, which categorizes data as to whether it's manufacturing or transportation and warehousing. It's actually based on the North American Industry Classification System, the NAICS codes, if you're familiar with that terminology. So I'm using GIS mapping in the background. One of the questions that I've got, we're a couple days away from this data being ready, the county truck restriction data from being ready to put into the public domain. Are there any objections to that? I guess this is more of a DeAndrea and a Joel question.
I mean, I don't see any reason that would be an issue.
DeAndrea, are you okay with that?
A few days away from putting the truck restrictions into the
Yes.
into the public domain?
This data here is a typical data layer that we have to get it moved from what's called the DPW's production server over to the county production GIS server. And then once it's there, all I have to do is tell OIT that we in fact want to move that data into the open data site. And that's what Rob Livermore showed to us a couple meetings ago. So that way the Googles of the world can come in and discover that data and be able to download it and incorporate it into their data.
And that's the information you pull from working with traffic that you and Mike were going back and forth on to make sure that you got it into the system.
Yes.
Yeah. So no, that's not an issue. I think it's good for them to have.
Okay, great. That was one of my takeaways from today. So then what I'd like to do next is just, unless there's any questions about the actual the GIS side of this, is just kind of look at the maps here. So Lewis and I, like I said, got together and we developed some. I went the wrong way. Lewis and I got together and identified the areas that we wanted to display on the map, and then I built maps showing that. So you'll see that I've got the manufacturing area here. So this is the Sparrows Point map. And then I did leave on the info group data for manufacturing and then transportation and warehousing. And then I've also got the roads that currently have truck restrictions within this area on here. And so we really tried to calm the map down a lot more so that you could see where's the traffic coming from and then where are the restrictions on the data. So as an example here in the Sparrows Point area, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into this area and make it a little easier for everybody to see, hopefully. So as you're coming out of the Sparrows Point area, come on, you'll see that we have a local truck restriction on this local road here, and then go up to get to this turnaround, so to speak. So, we were trying to keep folks off of this road back here. We have some other truck restricted roads that really, for all intents and purposes, the main way out of the TPA area is through Peninsula Expressway to go this way or to go up North Point Boulevard. But for the most part, everything else in this area, so we don't want somebody going up North Point Boulevard and take this left on whatever this is. I can't read that. It looks like Wise Avenue. We don't want them to take Wise Avenue to get through this area. We want to keep them on North Point Boulevard. So I don't, DeAndrea in her introduction said that, you all as a working group have already identified the types of roads that you want to use. I'm assuming that's the next mapping activity for me, is to map the roads that you actually say are truck routes. So, and I'm, myself and my staff are poised and ready to be able to do that. And then that also would be a data set that we would publish to that open data portal, is that these are what we perceive to be the truck routes. So each,
Doug,
yes.
let me just make sure. If I had to guess based on the way you're presenting the map right now, and make a suggestion, the blue is where the trucks are currently restricted, correct?
Yes, correct.
And then when you went down a little bit, you said the only way to really get out would be which two roads?
Well, here's the top. Well, okay, you could get out straight out onto 695 because they can use this interchange here through Peninsula Expressway. But if
So
they,
it's,
so you could get from this interchange to go 695 to the, I guess that they consider that north, and 695 to the south. So that's one way they could get out of TPA. They could get on here and go Peninsula Expressway and go that way. So another state road, and they could also go out North Point Boulevard.
So I guess my question to the work group would be, then would we, if we go back to what our deliverables are, would we make North Point and Peninsula Avenue a primary route if we're trying to meet the deliverable requirements?
Well, I think you'd have to, right? This is Lewis, because I think one of the challenges that makes it difficult to sync with the city is because with the city, essentially, it's a truck route or it's if it's not on the map, then it's restricted unless you're making obviously a local delivery. With you guys, you have restricted routes. You don't currently have truck routes, and so unless it's marked as restricted, then it's okay, right? So it's sort of two different approaches, and as you're looking to create that map as part of the deliverable, DeAndrea, then yeah, those would have to be, because they're the only 2 points into TPA that are, kind of what I'll call primary routes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is Greg. Just to add to that, the routes we're talking about are all state roads, by the way. Peninsula 695, obviously, and the other ones. So they'd have to be involved in this process, and we're going to make them truck routes.
Yeah, and there is a list that they publish, and they actually publish it on a pretty strong frequency. I think it's at least semi-annually, if not even greater frequency than that. But there are some state roads in the county that have truck restrictions. One that I'm aware of is 439 up near the Pennsylvania line. They put a restriction on that so that people don't try to use that to bypass the way station that's up north.
So Doug, would you be able to turn on a layer to show us what state routes that traverse through the county? What state roads that traverse through the counties that are restricted?
No,
Would
we've
you-
not. I've
no?
not done that mapping yet. If you want me to do that mapping, I certainly can.
I think, and I'm open to conversation from the committee. I think that will be important, because if North Point was one that they didn't want, not to say that it is, but if it was one that they didn't want, and the committee recommended that it was a primary, then we would have just wasted our time recommending that it was a primary when it's already restricted.
Right.
Like we put our restricted on there, I think their restricted on there on the map would be important, so that we don't make a recommendation on a restricted.
Okay, I'll begin that mapping next week, and that one should be easy, because where we had 400 or so regulations that I needed to look at, there might be 20 lines of restrictions in the state data. So, but they do not have that mapped, not that way anyhow. So, and then kind of to tag on that a little bit, I can also easily identify roads that are state roads, because it sounds like the vast majority of the roads that y'all are going to designate as truck routes are state roads.
So I just want to make sure that I'm doing a point of clarification for the committee. We are just identifying the streets that should be considered. So we're making a recommendation. That's what we were tasked to do, make the recommendation, not necessarily implement it at this point, but make the recommendation.
Can I ask a question also, DeAndrea, so because of the sort of difference between the 2 jurisdictions, right, and you guys having, very clear routes here, the blue designations where trucks are restricted, right, we're not suggesting, at least I don't think we are, that everywhere that's not designated, when we make the recommendation, that's not designated as a truck route suddenly becomes restricted, are we? Like, we kind of agreed, I think, that we didn't want to undertake the process of addressing every single road in the county, right? So, is that fair?
That's fair. There's no way for us to do that, I don't think.
Yeah, that's what I thought we were. So, we're using this ideally, if our recommendations were accepted, to provide, a great guide to drivers that these are the primary routes you should be using, unless or until you need to deviate from them. But it doesn't mean if you're on another road, as long as it's not restricted, that you're necessarily going to be cited for using that road.
Say it one more time, Louis.
Essentially, that as long as you're using a road that's not restricted, you're okay. But we're telling you that the best routes for you to use are those that we designate as, okay.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yep. Because it clearly says identify the types of streets that should be considered primary routes and local trucking routes and restricted routes. So we already have some restricted routes. I believe that coming out of here, there may be some other ones that will be recommended as restricted, but we'll have to have the definition behind why we recommend them to be restricted, because there's clear, is it regulations, Greg, or code that says what can be restricted currently?
It would be our regulations. We'd establish a regulation for that roadway in question.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, this is constantly changing. We may add some at some point, so this map will certainly change at some point.
Does that make sense, Louis?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and again, the key on the with selecting the primary routes, right, is that those are the roads that ideally aren't going to change over time, right? You can count on those because they're priority roads for where truck drivers need to get to.
And I would think if they're a primary road, it would be a road that's getting them to the interstate, right?
Yeah, or
it's
those
part of
major
the main
distribution
one.
centers. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry. It sounds like somebody wanted to say something. Okay.
So I guess I want to continue to use this map here as an example. So as we're looking at a space like the TPA space back here, using what DeAndrea just said, I think we're acknowledging that any interstate that traverses Baltimore County is a primary truck route, with the exception of areas where there are restrictions from the state level, because I think in this case the state trumps the county. So in this area we would designate 695, 95, 895. I think we would probably designate 157 Peninsula Expressway, and then 151 going out North Point Boulevard. And then one of the things we would need to, do, and I think this is part of the work that Louis and I did, was to make sure we understood where some of the truck traffic is coming from, is to evaluate this little manufacturing area down here, manufacturing zone, and say, okay, yeah, we do need to include 157 because it goes this, these folks need some way to get out of here, right? But then you've got to decide, are we only going to let this person come out and go south to get to the Beltway, or are we going to allow them to go northwest, so to speak, go this way? If you can see my cursor, my cursor's over here. And are we expecting them then to take a right and get onto Merritt Boulevard and get on this larger road to make their way up to the Beltway? Because there is a traffic restriction. It turns blue right here. Do we want to get them up in this mix up here with all of this? And I don't think I believe this is a school complex here. I don't believe we want to be sending commercial trucking past schools if we can avoid it. I don't know what your selection criteria is, but one of the things I've seen in some of the restrictions is that a lot of the restrictions in some way block the roads from schools. So, these maps will allow you to look at these areas, and then, you can take a crayon to them or whatever you want to do, but, just draw those lines. Or you could be descriptive for me and say, Peninsula Expressway from the Baltimore Beltway through to north to Merritt Boulevard, and then I can draw the lines that way. So you can either draw the lines on the map or give me descriptions that say, tell me which roads to identify as primary, or to, what was your language? We're looking for
primary routes and local trucking routes.
Right, but we're making recommendations, not designations.
Right. Exactly.
So one of the other maps that I wanted to point out here, and it's this Southwest map, is this anomaly coming out of this set of subdivisions here. So this area, there's no way that you can get across here because of the train tracks. And this is a big area because I think the UPS facility is right here. So the only road coming out of this big manufacturing area is Benson, and we've got that blocked with a restriction. And so the only way the folks can leave this area is to go north into the city. So I don't know if we're going to, whether the working group is going to be considering removing a restriction to allow them to exit through the county space.
So I'm going to jump on that real quick because I know John's probably ready to go crazy about that, right? So I don't think that's our expectation in any way, right? I think we have to be really cognizant of the city routes also, because I know, John has a problem with a lot of trucks coming down through Benson. And I don't think we can expect, because of the sort of, continuity with the city, that we would only allow them out through a county, route. We have to look at how those connect to the city, recognizing that, like, UPS would enter the city briefly and come back down in the county, right? That's the appropriate route. So,
and I just highlighted that area so that you can see very easily on the map now the manufacturing areas and see the restricted roads, so you could begin to say, yeah, okay, in fact, these folks need to go in this direction. So from this intersection of Benson Court and Benson, we want folks to go northeast onto this road from the city, which will lead them to South Caton Avenue and then to either Route 1 or 95, however, wherever they plan to go from there. But in theory, we should be looking at each one of these little areas to say, how is my truck traffic getting out of here? So like this entire area here drains to Route 1, so that's okay. This area right here drains to Route 1. So we just want to make sure this little area here drains to Route 1. It also drains this way to the other. This is Washington Boulevard Route 1, and this is the other Route 1. So, I guess that's where I'm going. With the maps allow you to see, you basically are trying to find, so like this area here can drain either to this part of Washington Boulevard. It also can go up Holland's Ferry to get on the Beltway. So I would expect that you're looking for, drains or routes that allow them to get out to these roads that you want them getting out to.
And if I can just jump in here real quick, the Benson Avenue, they have two ways out without coming south any further south on Benson Avenue. They have Joe Avenue that takes them right out to Caton Avenue and 95, or to Caton Avenue and Route 1, which puts them on 695. I think the issue on the west side is the same issue on the east side with, for an example, Wise Avenue. You have these trucks coming out of there that can go up Benson Avenue and out Joe. And the problem is right now, currently, they're coming through residential communities as they are on Wise Avenue, which is, the reason we're having this meeting and coming up with these restrictions, because there's, been tons and tons of complaints, and any idea, if the community would lose, and I know John's on the call, but it's just not John. This are our office and the community engagement office. Our phones will be blown off the hook if we allowed those trucks to continue any further south down Benson Avenue. I just wanted to put that out there. They got two other options to get to 695 or 95.
And we totally agree with that, Pete. So, right, I think as you're looking at camera placement, right, that's the kind of location that we should really be attentive to, right? Where are we seeing large volumes of trucks that are coming through residential areas where they clearly have alternate routes that are more appropriate?
And if I may, if we can, I'm just going to go back to, you don't have to move the map there, but when we were over on the east side and we were talking about Peninsula Expressway and you kind of arrowed over that one industrial area. Anyone from the east side knows this. It is literally a rock skip and a jump from that industrial park to the 695 ramp. I would strongly suggest not even allowing them to go any further up Peninsula Expressway to Merritt Boulevard, because that is where they're going to get lost and get jammed up in these small little communities with these tight streets. And that's where the complaints come from. Again, it's just what we're hearing in our office from the constituency, both in District 1 and District 7.
Fair and very valid point, which is why OCS is on the task force, so that we can make sure we take those things into consideration. I'm going to ask for some assistance from the task force at this point, because before Doug continues, because I think it's important that this map of Baltimore County is a large map of Baltimore County. I was just sitting here wondering if we should break the map up into four segments and have 2 people from the work group work on a recommendation for primary and local routes based on their segment of the map, in order for us to try to get this portion of the deliverable completed. Because I think Doug has done a lot of work on this in order to make sure we knew where the manufacturing zones were and the restricted areas were. But the goal of this group is to make sure that we can make some recommendations for the primary and the local. And I don't think we could do that on this call right now. I think that that's going to require some work outside of the large task force and bring it back to the task force, to the work group next meeting, so that we can have it in that March report. So at this point, I'd like some discussion on how you all think we should do that, if you think that's a great idea. But we need to try to figure out how we arrive at that deliverable.
DeAndrea, I'm open for it. I think it's a great idea, and I'm open to do it. So that's my opinion.
So I will say these are PDFs, right? So if somebody has Adobe Acrobat Professional, they have the ability to do markup in here. There's commenting that you can do. You can draw lines and things of that nature. So you could actually go onto this map and draw a line from here to here, and use a standard color throughout and say, I want to make this a primary route. So you could either do it by marking up the map and then give those maps back to me, or you could say, I want to make Wilkins Avenue, Maryland 372 from the city line to the Baltimore Beltway a truck route, a primary truck route, or I want to make it a local truck route, whichever that may be. I want to make, I guess this is Benson here again. I want to make Benson from Benson Court to the city line a primary truck route or a local truck route. So if what your expectation is that this is going to come back to me and I'm going to map it, I just need to know how you want me to apply the recommendations, to map them. That's pretty much the exercise that we did with this to build this. The restricted routes is, the regulation said the restriction is on this road, and then it's from this road to that road. And so that was pretty straightforward for us to go in and do the mapping related to that.
If I could make one sort of suggestion or sort of process idea, I wonder if, depending on what Doug's turnaround time is, because I really do not have a good idea on how long the scope of this work takes, that Doug essentially start by filling out some of the primary routes we just talked about, some of those main areas that folks should take based on what he's already done and what he's already mapped. Because I think Doug has an idea here of what we're looking for, but doesn't have some of the individual community pieces, like when we're talking about Benson and Joe here, and that we take that sort of chunking it up for different group members and make that essentially a review of what he did on the primaries and then a creation of the locals. So really kind of mostly the idea of what you're saying, DeAndre, but let Doug's give people more of a starting point by just filling in those few streets that we talked about.
Is that pretty easy for you to do, Doug?
Yeah, I can take the couple that we've already done and start building a layer. Or if you were to give me a guidance and say, start with all the interstate and all the state roads, and then turn them into primary routes, and then what we would do is subtract from that. The subtraction would be easier. It's the local roads like this that I'm going to have to go in and grab. The coding is that's a county road, whereas all the state roads are coded as state roads in our data. So I could easily go in and grab all those. So it's just that's an easy way to do it. But I don't know if there's going to be. I don't know if this is going to be eventually be legislation that gets written that says these roads are the primary, or if it's going to be a map that generates that, or if it's going to be a regulation. I also want to help facilitate the development of that so that things get described so that there's very little to be interpreted. The less interpretation that the layperson has to do on this, the better. So, but yes, I can go and begin to build a routes map just based on the little bit we talked about today. But if you've got more guidance to say we know that all the state roads are going to be primaries, that makes it even easier.
Well, we don't know that all the state roads are going to be primary, but it does not say that we have to have a certain number of primary routes or local truck routes. It just says that we should recommend some throughout this process. So I don't want to blanket say that all of them are. I don't think that would be appropriate, but the work group can offer up some feedback on that, because it's really a task that we all are supposed to agree on and say that that's what we want to put forward. So it's open to the work group if you want to make all the state roads, recommend that they all be a primary.
Well, I'm just suggesting, Deandra, to use that as a starting point. I certainly don't think that the state roads that are in the northern end of the county all need to be truck routes.
Okay.
I'm just to get a quicker starting point. It's easier for me to select and move them into a new layer and then subtract than it is for me to extract the ones that you want and then only include those.
Okay.
So it's just a faster process.
Got it. Okay. So are we saying that the next step would be for Doug to identify those primary routes based on what he can see on the map, and then what are we suggesting for the local routes?
So I guess I think that I really like that as a starting point. Just understanding then we'll pull away after getting a chance to kind of review those. On the local side, I guess my thought process is that, you have to have absent direct access using a state road like what you have with the TPA situation, right? That I'm not an expert by any means, right, of all the roads that enter these industrial areas and the like. So we clearly just need to look at what are the primary county roads that are, provide an exit and egress from those areas. For example, I might have a disagreement with Pete about the fact that he said Merritt Boulevard should not be, but I would say that Merritt Boulevard would be primed to be a local truck route, because that's the route you want people to be on when they are operating locally in the Dundalk area, until they have to divert from that to make a delivery. So I think those are the kinds of things that we would want to look at more closely in each of these areas that are zoned where they're likely going to have a lot of truck traffic. Like this one here, actually, I saw this. Is this still on the southwest side?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I saw this as you were showing that actually, and I thought, I can't tell from this at all. How does a truck even get to this area? I'm not sure what's here, but clearly the coding is such that it would seem to require truck travel.
Yeah, it's landlocked. There's
Yeah.
there are businesses down there that meet that criteria. So, manufacturing, transportation, and warehousing, but there's no way to get out of this manufacturing area because this road here is blocked. So the main road off of Alco this way is blocked. And then at this end of Alco, it's blocked. And I can give you the road names in a second if I turn that off. So on the Lansdowne Road and Hollands Ferry Road, there's no way in theory for them to get out and get to a major road.
Doug, you're absolutely correct. That right there is like when the pie-shaped piece of the southwest corner bumping up against the Baltimore City line. And you are correct. And currently, there is no through truck traffic from Hollands Ferry Road and Lansdowne Road heading towards the Beltway. It allows them to go up Hollands Ferry Road to Patapsco Avenue. So you are right on the way those lines. Right now, the way those lines are drawn, a truck wouldn't be able to get in or out of there.
Right.
Well, that's not exactly true because it's a through truck restriction, guys. They can come in off the road, go to that facility and go back out. They just can't go from point A to point B. All our restrictions are through trucks from point A to point B. If you're somewhere in the middle, you can still use that road.
As long as you're making that pickup or delivery from that location, then you can use basically any road that gets you, any of those roads that allow you to get there right there.
So it's not totally no trucks on that road. Just want to make that clear. Sorry to chime in.
And Greg, certainly that's my ignorance of what the regulations actually mean.
That's okay. We'll get into the signs in a little bit to kind of explain it more.
Can we also bring up one other issue maybe in Doug's analysis is that when you first showed, I think the very first, the larger picture actually, Doug, before we got into some of the quadrants and maps, that it appeared that there were locations where there were some, there was a lack of synchronization between the county and the city. Right, and where I thought I saw some routes that the city had red, which is a primary truck route, and then when it hit the county, I thought it went to blue. I could be wrong about that because we were looking at it on kind of a, broad scale, but I think that's a really important thing for us to look at those roads as part of that because we're just creating, an artificial barrier immediately if that's the case. And so understanding if there are roads like that, again, we were looking at it so broadly, I'm not positive, but I just want to make sure that we are cognizant of that.
Yeah, I'm looking across the border now, and I'm not, so far I haven't seen anywhere there's a conflict between, the closest might be like right here where they've got a truck route that comes down and goes this way, but it doesn't actually say take whatever this Patterson is into the county.
I think the one actually now that we're looking at it more closely, I think when we were looking at it right where you were, shoot, I just saw it. I think I just lost it on that last movement right here. Actually, it looks like it was probably looking at almost right in the center of your map where the line is. I can't tell the roadway.
So this is
yes, right there. I think when we were looking at it, scaled out a bit, it appeared to me that red route from the city connected straight to that blue route in the county, and clearly that's not the case. They have an option there. So,
right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Just one more thing to add, guys. All our restrictions will end at the city line. We have no jurisdiction in the city, so any of our truck routes will go from a certain point and end at the city line. Just a heads up on that.
Yeah, and the one weird one like that, and maybe the weird's not a technical term, but is Taylor Avenue that comes across that, it turns on, it turns off, it turns on, it turns off. So and we showed the restriction going through the city because we didn't want them to think they could drive on our part of Taylor Avenue and then drive on. So when we put this data in the public domain, we're going to have to chop that off at the city line. But that we did show that going through only because the Taylor Avenue connects through the city.
So the green is restricted.
Right. That's time restricted. Yes. For the county.
Restricted for the county. Okay. And are we labeling it correctly for the county on the map restricted? Because I want to make sure I have the it's not necessarily it's no through traffic. I thought we were coming up with restricted routes. So Greg, can you clarify? We don't currently have restricted routes per se. We have no through traffic.
Correct. I believe the green is just a time restricted route. Why it's different from the blues. Is that right, Doug?
Yes. So Greg, you in essence, you just contradicted what we were saying. Are we going to call this data no through trucks, or are we going to call it truck restrictions?
If it's ours, it has to be no through trucks.
Okay, no through. Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Now it may be at certain times, which is what these are, green.
Right, and that's attribution in the data. But I will change the name of the data from truck restrictions to no through trucks.
Right, because this committee will recommend or propose restricted routes, which is different than no through truck.
Okay, that change will take place before we move this data to the public domain.
So Joel, from this committee, since we don't have any regulations that say restricted routes, would we have to build something in place so that we could have the authority to have no restricted routes? Because Greg, do we have authority to have restricted routes in the county?
I would think so, DeAndrea, but still, I think we would say from this point to this point.
Yes.
Whatever those points are.
Right.
Hey, Doug, can I make one suggestion?
Certainly.
Doug, have you looked at the federal classification maps that call out what's arterials, what's collectors, what's interstates, whatever?
Not for this exercise, but I'm real familiar with that data. Yes.
Man, what if you drop that on top of here? You see where the arterials are, see where interstates are. Those are going to be your primary routes, I would think. Already identified. Just a thought.
Yeah, and that correlates very closely to the state roads.
Yep, probably.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, actually. Can I ask one other question? I know that at the very beginning, I think there was a comment in maybe our first meeting about the fact that we weren't sure if what Baltimore City did from a color standpoint was compliant with maybe ADA or some other disability guidelines about color schemes, right? I don't know anything about that, so I really have to defer to those of you with the county about that. But ultimately, whether it means Baltimore City needs to revisit their color coding, or if theirs is consistent with that, it'd be great to have these color schemes mirror one another so that we can have that broader map that can be available for drivers to easily understand, as opposed to conflicting colors. Let me say that mean one thing in the city and something entirely different in the county.
And I think, that's a GIS thing. And I think they put together their map and they put together their their online application internally to the Department of Transportation within Baltimore City. I think if somebody like DeAndrea were to approach them and say, hey, we'd like to do this as a regional approach. Let's build a regional map and a regional application. We could agree on symbology that would meet all the ADA requirements and the like. We might even want to reach out and make this more regional. And instead of either the county hosting it or the city hosting it, is see if we want to do something like this at the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. And then you have, the ability for Howard County and Anne Arundel and Hartford and the other folks that participate in that be able to play in this. Because I know they host things, the BMC hosts data like that already for us and produces application. Like they have the regional bike and ped map. So it shows all the bike lanes and things of that nature. So that might be something that they could host as and then all we would be responsible for is giving them data on some schedule to do updates.
Okay.
So
I will, I think we have a BRTB, Baltimore Regional Transit Board meeting coming up. I will mention it to Todd from BMC to see if they are working on anything like this for the region. I don't recall any presentations of any mention of anything, but they have a lot of subgroups that could be doing something. Greg, you were on it before me. Do you know of anything that they were working on as it relates to maps such as this for the region?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, but certainly possible.
Yeah. So I'll ask and see if that, Lewis, if that is something that they maybe did in the past and it works for a regional map. And have a conversation with Todd about it and see and maybe report out at the next meeting.
And they have a freight subcommittee that I sit on, that we can encourage that through the freight subcommittee because they're always talking about projects. I just want to make sure that as, for Baltimore County, as you guys are moving forward as well, understanding that the other jurisdictions in the BMC, this might be a little slower process and I'm not trying to hang it up. If we can have just consistency between the city and the county, at least at first, since you guys are the connected first two that are clearly going to be, up and running.
Okay, I have a quick question, Deandra. Regarding the earlier, they zoned in on Lockern, I believe it was Patterson Avenue. That is an area where we do have complaints. It's not near the volume of other places. Does the colors, do they line up the way they're supposed to? Because people, I believe it's off Liberty Road. They're trying to bypass, I don't know if it's Northern Parkway or what it is, and go down Patterson Avenue. Is the way it's lined up currently between the city and the county, does it agree with each other, look like?
So what the map is saying right now is the city has identified this as a local truck route, and then that follows down this way. The county has a no through trucks restriction from Liberty Road to Lockern to the city line on Patterson Avenue.
Okay.
So it's not, I don't know that it's supposed to line up there. I think what would line up is that you can see the red here is a through truck route in Liberty Heights down here, Liberty Road up here, is that potentially we would then say Liberty Road to the Beltway is a primary, recommended primary truck route.
Okay, yeah, it seems to me, I guess the bigger picture here is we're going to have areas where we definitely do not want you to go down that road, and that's probably where the areas that we're having problems that eventually we're going to have these cameras. And then we also have places where I guess we recommend that the trucks go down, and then we're going to have places where trucks are going to go that we would rather them not go, but we're really not going to do much about it. Is that fair to say?
Well, from the work group perspective, we're going to recommend routes that they should use as primary routes that they should use as residential, and we're going to recommend some restricted routes. So if there's a route that you feel is one that should be restricted, that you don't think they should be going down, I think that's a part of the recommendations.
Right. Like for instance, Peninsula Expressway, we're going to want them to go to 695 and hit it up there. But then if they go down Peninsula Expressway and continue down to Merritt Boulevard and turn right and go down Merritt, we probably rather them not go that way, but we're not going to necessarily restrict it. And it's not necessarily a problem. We clearly don't want them to go to Wise Avenue from North Point Road or from Merritt. And then, of course, we have the problem from Dundalk Avenue from the port as well that we've also have as part of this Dundalk plan. Okay, I appreciate it.
Sure. So we've gone past the discussion. Well, no, not actually. We still got time for the map development discussion. So we still have 10 minutes on the map development discussion. Can we recap what we say we're going to do in terms of the next steps? Because I think we only got as far as the primary routes, Joel, in terms of Doug putting that layer on and building from there.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I guess this is one we would want a little more input on. Where does this map actually need to extend, right? Because we've talked about the heavy lift of a county-wide map, and that there are areas that don't necessarily need that. And so I think the decision point we probably want to make today is what's the total scope of where we need to be looking at, and then we can, after that, figure out how to chunk it out into different areas. I mean, is there, Doug, based on what you've done, sort of a part of Middle River that you would sort of call the cutoff, to the north of, like, this is where this really needs to happen, or does the map sort of look like this even as you go up towards the northeastern part of the county?
I think what I do is build. Let's turn this off for a second, so that eliminates that confusion. We just want to make sure we don't conflict with any of this. But I think what I will do, based on what I've got written down here, is to pull out the state roads and use that as a starting point to say this is what I think we're recommending as truck restrictions. And I'll be pulling out the interstates and the all state roads. I'll also kind of look at that along with the federal functional classification of arterials and interstates. I think that's going to bring some county roads into the mix a little bit. But I'll pull in that data, and then that can be another layer that we look at. So then, we can look at that in relationship to something like this and say, oh, we want to allow people to come up the Peninsula Expressway here to the intersection with Merritt and go that way. I don't honestly know if the state road continues here or if it stops right here. I'd have to look at that a little more closely, but I think we want to, it would be Peninsula to this. So then it's real, like I said, it's real easy for you guys to say, you folks to say, you're all that guys, is to say anywhere northwest of this point, it's not, we don't want to mark that as a truck route, or recommend as a truck route. So the other thing I will do is map the state restrictions to make sure we don't override any of those. Because I know there are lane restrictions on the Beltway, and then there are, like I said, a couple roads out there that have our state roads with restrictions for one reason or another. So my two main action items are map the state restrictions and then build a layer for a starting point for recommended truck routes.
Okay.
That got it? And then just a third action item of mine that I've got to do is to rename the existing data, this data that we've been working on. So instead of being called truck restrictions, it'll be called no through trucks.
Right.
And if I can just maybe add one more, not to Doug's work, but I think an important thing to recognize is what Doug has done here with these blue routes showing us where the restrictions is standing for an analysis standpoint. But on the map that ultimately is developed, you don't necessarily want to show those. You just want to show the routes where they're where you want them. Right, because that makes it really easy for them to follow, as opposed to, oh my gosh, what are all these blue roads that are intersecting with everybody, right? So we're trying to make it so they see, oh, these are the routes I'm supposed to be on. If they're not highlighted in whatever the color scheme is, then I need to take a much closer look about whether I'm legally allowed on that route. And to your point earlier, DeAndrea, right, that you want to make some recommendations maybe on some roads that should be restricted, then that also ties to the discussion about signage that I assume we're getting ready to have, right, and where we would place signage. So,
but we are in agreement that when we do the map, it will have the restricted that we currently don't have on there. It won't have the through streets, but it will have the restricted streets.
Oh, I didn't think that would be the case, because I think you're making it perhaps really more difficult for them to follow if if you want to have it, if it's all GIS and we can just check truck restrictions like this, then absolutely, you want that as an option. But I think, if I'm coming to view the map just as an overview, the easiest visible thing for me to see is the highlighted routes are the ones I'm allowed to use.
So what I would recommend is have one, like Lewis is saying, for truckers, but then for the interaction with the public, we could have a second set of maps that would show not only the truck routes, but the roads that are currently have the no through truck moniker on it.
Yeah.
So, for me to produce these maps like this, for me to produce a map like this, all it literally is turn a layer on or turn a layer off and then say export map. It was, the harder part was talking to Lewis and saying, okay, how do we want to do this? What do we want to show and all that? And we spent, probably an hour doing that. Once I knew what the syntax was, it probably took me an hour to produce these 5 or 6 maps that I sent out. So, it's the important part is having the data available to you and then just turning it on and off and the like. So, my recommendation would be, sure, I'll produce a set of maps that show proposed routes, and then we'll have another set of maps in theory that show both the routes and the no through trucks. And I would include the city data on both of those. And I can re-symbolize the city data however we want to do it to match the county data. Right now, I think I would just, for confusion's sake, just use the city symbology.
Okay. So let me check with the group and see if you all are in agreement on the next steps as it relates to the map, or would you like to have more discussion on that? I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to take it as though we're all in agreement on the next steps as it relates to the map. And I'm going to thank Doug and Lewis for their diligent work on this. This is a lot of work to put in to get us this far, and I think it's looking really good. And I appreciate the work that you all have done. I have to especially thank Doug, because I know I've moved him away from some other things to work on this. So Doug, thank you so much for that presentation and being willing to help us on the work group with putting this together.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for
That was awesome, Doug. Thanks.
And thanks again, Lewis.
No, you did it all.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, so with that, I am going to introduce Greg Karsky. Most of you all have heard from him before. He's our Chief of Traffic Engineering and Transportation Bureau. So Greg, we'll turn it over to you for your presentation on the signage.
Okay. Can I share screen yet? Do you guys need to hit a button for me, or?
Give me 1 second.
Yep.
All right. You're able to now?
All right. Does everybody see that one?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Very good. Pretty simple, really. These signs are very standard. There's nothing fancy about them. The ones on the left side you're seeing are the ones on Wise Avenue. I'm glad Doug picked that one to show on the map so we know where we are. But basically we say no through trucks over 3/4 ton from this point to an end point. In this case, it's North Point Boulevard or Merritt Boulevard. We'll have those at each end, identifying the no through truck route. If you look to the top right, that is a sign that the city uses, little different from ours, same symbol, but theirs will say local deliveries only. I don't know how you enforce that sign, to be honest with you. I don't know what's considered local delivery. I don't know. I'm delivering to Baltimore, Maryland. I'm on that street. Am I okay? I don't know. So ours are a lot more descriptive. We say over this amount, this point to this point. The bottom right is one of our newer signs. It's all one piece. It's a little bit bigger. It's a 36 by 58 sign. So it's a little bit larger. People can see it much better. We could certainly put that out there wherever you guys want, certainly on the ones that are photo enforced. We will put that sign with the photo enforced underneath it, like you see on the city sign on the top right. I can't say every sign on every one of these 400 routes is there, but at some point they were all posted. They should be posted, but we have not run through and checked every single one of those yet. But I know the ones on Ys have been updated in the past year. They should be the larger version on the bottom right, and they should be in good shape. That's basically it in a nutshell. Any questions? Bring them on.
So can we talk about the 3/4 ton limitation actually, because it's so narrow, right? 1,500 pounds.
Yeah.
That's your pickup truck, right, with a load in the back bed, right? So.
Well, no, not really. It really should be what the state uses, which is over 5 ton.
Yeah.
The problem is if we go through and change these signs to say 5 ton, people are going to go nuts. Like, what are you doing? It was 3/4 ton. Why are you making it 5 ton now? Now bigger trucks will come through, which technically is not the case. That's kind of a discussion that's a great question, but I don't think we're going to get into that discussion at this moment. But that's a huge deal, and it's very complicated, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and the city had the same issue. I mean, those signs with those weight limits are really dated.
Right.
To be honest with you, and a commercial motor vehicle is over 10,000 pounds, so gets really questionable with that kind of signage. Is all.
Yeah, and the city sign, I don't care for that one. That's really has nothing to do with that one.
Yeah.
There's no weight limit. There's no, it's local delivery. I just don't know what that means.
So, can I ask you, Lewis? I think you just said, did you say something along those lines? We went through this in the city, and what was that like? I mean, was the same issue present?
So the city said they actually were in the process of removing all of their signs that referred to 3/4 ton. Now, this was many years ago, right, that we went through this process on the city side, and that they had all, prior to even doing the truck map, that they had already had that in the works, just recognizing how dated those signs were. I don't know or recall how they came up with the particular sign in the example above. I do know they also have some different signs around not just their prohibitions, but on their primary routes, they have signage that identifies that it's a truck route. I think it's a sign with white and maybe green lettering of some sort that has an actual identifier that you are on a primary or through truck route. So.
What I like to do, guys, we have like a 2-page email that explains the whole 3/4 ton, 5 ton thing. I'll send it out to everybody. You guys can read it at your leisure to try to understand it better. It is a little bit complicated, and there are issues with it.
So part of the task of the work group is to evaluate the existing signage and recommend necessary adjustments. So I think that it's going to be important that we understand why Baltimore County uses the signage that we currently use. And it's one thing to have the map to make sure that they see the map, but I do think that it's important to also have good signage. And I don't know what good signage is. So I think we as a work group have to come up with some recommendations as it relates to signage as well. So Greg, from a transportation perspective, I know you're going to send out a 2-page document about the signage, but for us lay people who don't really understand what we're trying to get over, or what we're trying to get across to the traveling public, to the truck drivers, are there other recommendations that we've considered in terms of signage, or we've just always gone with this sign?
If you look at the bottom right, I mean, that is the MUTCD standard with that symbol through the truck. And I would think we would stay with that. Whether we say 5-ton or 3/4 ton, that's certainly up for discussion. But the base is going to be the symbol, the through thing, and then here to the city line or here to whatever roadway at the bottom. I don't see us deviating from that because we do have to follow MUTCD federal standards.
So I think that's an important distinction, that is a requirement for transportation to follow. And maybe we should share what those standards are, because I'm assuming those standards are out there because they expected every state to use the same type of sign. Is that correct?
Right. Especially with truckers, they go from state to state. They want to see that symbol. Yeah, I recognize that from, all over the country. We got to stay with that.
That may limit the amount of work we could do as it relates to signs.
I like that.
But I'm opening it up to the work group because I don't want to just say that's it. Okay, we got to go. The recommendation is this, and that's what it is.
I'm not sure what out there is better than this. I guess over the 3/4 ton, if we were to enforce that, clearly a tractor trailer, it's obvious that would be cited. It's at the same time a landscaping truck that was probably a 1 ton would be in violation. Is that the way it's supposed to really go? I mean, I realize you probably shouldn't say commercial vehicle because that could be construed as any number of things. So I'm not sure there is something better out there. I do think education for us is probably part of it, just so we all know. And I don't really see a different way of, I think it has to be simple. I think people recognize this. I think the symbol, everybody knows what 3/4 ton means. I think for the most part, it's listed on the registration when we pull somebody over. But everybody knows it is generally targeted towards the larger trucks. So I think it's probably the best we're going to do. The simplest.
So I'm not suggesting that the county is going to go through and re-sign everything, but I do think it should be recognized in the report that a sign that says over 3/4 ton is not an appropriate sign. It's an outdated sign. It is not applicable to what we're trying to do here, and that it should be part of the recommendation to meet the deliverables, that those signs should be revisited, at least in terms as they get placed, as new signs get placed in the future, that there may be a consideration about replacing that language.
So Lewis, I hear what you're saying, but I guess in order to put that recommendation in the report, I would like to know what we're basing it on that is outdated, because I've also just heard Greg say that the standards that we follow, that's the sign that's in there.
So I'm sorry. I didn't think that Greg meant that with regards to the over 3/4 ton. I thought he was speaking to the imagery that is on the sign. Right. And I agree with the imagery. It's also why you see in Baltimore City, they use the exact same imagery, even though their language is different. Please correct me if I misinterpreted, Greg.
No, you're right. So you have a couple of options. You say local deliveries like the city, ours say over 3/4 ton, and the state says over 5 ton. Now, technically, they should say over 5 ton, but in the past, it was all this perception of what people would think if we went through and changed all our signs. They're going to think we're allowing more trucks, and that's why it was never done and never got through council. And again, I will send you the whole memo out that explains the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think that'd be a great thing to see, Greg, because I think most, probably not everybody here is aware of gross vehicle weight ratings, right, and what all is inclusive, which includes the weight of the vehicle as part of that. And that's why I know the 5 ton piece is actually the more appropriate sign, because the federal definition and Maryland's definition of a commercial motor vehicle is over 10,000 pounds, and that's 5 tons.
Right.
I have a question.
So I'm not saying you need to go back and re-sign everything. I understand there are many practical reasons why not, but for the purposes of a report with recommendations, I think we would want a report to reflect that.
I think it's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
Sure.
So this is a question both for Captain Brown and for Lewis, but just on what this means in practice or in practicality, right? Because I assume the police, in terms of enforcement, are not citing any vehicles, that are just over 3/4 of a ton, that are like the landscaping trucks that we talked about, that are appropriate. I mean, so I guess the question for the police is, what does this actually mean for what you're doing? And for Lewis, what does that 3/4 ton mean for the behavior of your members?
Okay, yeah, I think the police people that we have in the police department know what we're targeting, and that's, we know the complaints of the areas that have been, where the community has voiced their concerns. Wise Avenue obviously being one of them, so that's what they're enforcing. And I have to ask a question on Wise Avenue. I know there's a bridge over. Is it Bear Creek or Chin Creek? I'm not sure what it is. Does the rating have to be under 5 ton to technically go over that bridge safely? I don't even know, because maybe that's part of the reason why it's like it is. I don't know.
No, it's actually not due to the bridge. It's due to the residents along there complained years ago. So we want all the traffic to go down Peninsula rather than on Wise. That's why it's here.
Yeah, and
It's not the bridge.
Okay, I have to wonder if, if you raise it to 5 ton, would we, what would it do? I think the community would be an uproar, number one, but I think,
Yeah.
are we stopping some of the trucks that are borderline 5 ton from going through there? And it's a good thing now because it says 3/4, maybe not. So maybe that's something to consider. I don't know.
I'd like to say something. Wise Avenue, we want those big trucks restricted. That is the whole idea. And as far as police enforcement, I've yet to see police enforcement on Wise Avenue. They have to pull those trucks over and check the manifest. And I was told a lot of the traffic division doesn't know how to read the manifest. We don't want the big trucks on Wise Avenue unless they're making a delivery. And the only way the police can enforce that is to check the manifest and see if they've actually delivered something on Wise Avenue.
Right. We have a commercial vehicle team that works all over the county, and of course, this is one of the big areas we worked. Some of the local police are familiar with reading manifests. Some are not. Some are honestly intimidated by pulling trucks over simply because they don't know a lot of the restrictions and a lot of what they should be looking for. So yeah, you're right about that. And we are working on that with regard to getting those, especially in the Dundalk precinct, trained, because clearly that's what's growing, and that's what has grown and has continued to grow, and that's where our problems are. But I hear what you're saying, and you're right in some regards.
Hey, Captain, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you enforce them, you have to pick them up from, say, North Point Boulevard, follow them all the way to Wise, and make sure they didn't stop in order to enforce that.
Yes.
That's you know what? That's a legal stop.
Right, for the most part. Yes, because it but then because it's a truck, because it says through trucks, so right, clearly he's going through. I think that would be the safe way to do things. Exactly.
That's a lot of work for you guys.
All right, so it sounds like we have some type of agreement on the signs, not necessarily that all of the signs would be replaced, but are we in agreement as a work group that we mentioned in the report that we need to at least have the federal definition and the Maryland definition of over 5 tons? as a part of the recommendation as we move forward to update the signs. Did I get that right, Lois?
So I would definitely support that recommendation and understand the reasons why you might not want to do that with existing signs, but perhaps as signs are replaced.
So that's an open point. Now I'm making it a topic of discussion for the work group because it is a deliverable that needs to go into um, the report, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page that that is something that we want to add to the report, with the caveat that not all current signs be replaced, maybe as we move forward. But I think that if we're going to do that, I think we should also make sure that there's some education behind it, because it will lead some residents to believe that we're allowing more trucks to come through versus not. And I know that we're trying to make sure that the truckers understand what can go through and what cannot, but we also have a balance with the community that we have to have there. So I would adjust it to say make the recommendation, but also give the caveat that education along there will be very important if we change these signs, because of what may come from that. It's one thing for the truckers to understand, but it's another thing for the community to understand what that actually means. I think that's an important part of it.
Well, I like the idea of being consistent. And if we change some signs some of the time to update, some are going to read 3/4, some are going to read 10,000 pounds. I don't know who's going to do the educating, but I don't want to give my phone number out. Greg, I have a question. Can we talk also about location of these signs? I'm looking at the upper
Sure.
left, and that's right on Wise Avenue. I mean, right there. By the time a trucker sees that, it's too late. What can't we back these signs up and give them more notice than that?
There may be some advanced signs there, Ron. I'm not sure exactly. I just picked that one off as an example, but certainly we could look for more advanced signing too. We try to get them before they turn, obviously.
Yeah, well, the problem there is there's a yield right of way right behind that sign
Right.
that I don't know that a trucker could read it. And
Again,
he's coming off Merritt Boulevard and going on the Wise. It's too late for him.
there may be other signs there, Ron. Again, I just picked that particular one as an example.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to make it a point to go over and look. I just haven't noticed before today that sign is just right up on everything.
Yeah.
Greg, I do have a question. What specifications do we use when we put out signs in terms of spacing?
In terms of, I'm sorry, spacing?
In terms of spacing or location of the signs, how do we decide where we're going to put the signs?
Well, something like this is pretty simple. You have A road, B road goes between A and C. We put them at each ends. So a beginning point each one.
Beginning point of each one, but far enough, do we have specifications to say it has to be far enough away from the turning lane so that they can see it in enough time?
And there's no specifications that I'm aware of for that. We try to get it in a place where everybody can see it from the all different angles. May have multiple signs at some locations. We may not. Really depends on the location.
Okay. I was just one from a different perspective. When we do bus stops, we do the bus stop far enough away from the intersection so that the person's not as close to the intersection. They have some specification associated with that. So I wasn't sure if there were any for the signs.
Yep.
Now, do we make the new signs, these, if and when they're used, that say over 5 ton on the roadways where the actual legislate or the cameras are going to be? Do we make them there and start it at that point? Again, of course, Wise Avenue would be one of them roads, probably.
Yeah, again, I think the ones in Wise are already upgraded to these bigger signs. And
Okay.
we have to add the photo enforced under that bottom right sign I'm showing. If it's a automated enforcement location. By law, we have to say photo enforced.
Right, but I meant in addition to that, just to kind of warn people, you know, this is kind of what it's about. But
I wouldn't think so. If you look at the city sign, they just have that one sign that says photo enforced.
It says that on that sign?
On the top right, it does. See the top
Oh.
right sign?
I know, I gotta read. Let me.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell right down at kind of right below the main part of the sign. They might also have something else more specific at the locations
Photo.
that we can ask them about too. For some reason, I seem to remember they had a really strong sign around their camera locations as well, that we could certainly ask them, or I get somebody to take a picture of a location like that too. So
I do think if we're gonna, when we recommend as a part of this, the vehicle height monitoring system, you have to give notification that there's a monitoring system in the area. So I do think that we're gonna have to add to the signage, the photo enforced part.
Right, yep.
well,
So Captain, I
absolutely.
think that goes back to what you're asking about. Do we add? Because I thought you said federal enforced. I was like, what? It says
Nope,
that.
nope, photo
You
enforced,
said
sorry.
photo enforced.
Photo.
So
And
Joel,
Lewis
I
may
think
be
we
right,
have
there
to
may
make
be,
that.
sorry.
Go ahead, Greg.
I said Lewis may be correct. There may be other signs that the city has that I'm not aware of, but that's the one I picked up at that location, so. I'd be surprised they had something right at the photo spot, but maybe they do. You don't want trucks to like slam on their brakes right at where the photo's gonna take place either.
yeah, I don't think it's like right where the camera is. It's more of an approaching type of area sign, because one of the things that we encourage the city, as the cameras are mobile and they have relocated some of them, and I said, I don't really see a reason why you should take the sign down. Leave the sign there and let people believe that there is still a camera currently at that location. And then you don't have any issues with, perhaps a problem that went away coming back. So, yeah.
And that's the same thing we do with our speed cameras. They rotate them, but we still keep the signs there that say photo enforced.
Yeah.
So it'd be the same idea. We wouldn't take them down, obviously, if you move the camera around.
So Captain, I think it goes back to your acts. We definitely will have to make a recommendation that photo enforced signs will need to go at certain locations.
Okay, forgive me, but when we finish this in March, we're going to present it, and at some point it'll go to the county council, and then at some point what the actual legislation will say will come out. Is that where the plan?
Joel, can you talk through the?
Right. So the preliminary report is due in March, and then our final report is due in August. We anticipate that the August one will be more focused on the actual implementation and the citation system, and as well as the actual camera locations. But yes, those recommendations are intended to directly inform what the legislation will say, with the caveat that there may be some areas that we, as a work group, don't all agree or don't necessarily have enough information in hand, and may say, here is, recommendation A, B, C, but, on issue D, the council should just know this information and make their best, determination in the legislation. But generally, we want to have it pretty much, have the recommendations be cause and the bill be effect.
Okay, so do we have any ideas, when is the county looking to have this completed and enacted? Because the reason I ask is because I'm probably going to be overseeing those who are going to be trying to read this and do so, with regard to how to figure out between us and the vendor to figure out who to cite and all that. So is it by the end of the year or not necessarily? Maybe 22.
I think that we need that kind of input to figure that out. I mean, I think the report we want in by August, but there are obviously mitigating factors that will mean that we can't put the bill in the next day, and one of them being that we need to translate the recommendations into legislation. And so I think it'll be important to have you looped in when we're in that part of the process. But I don't think we have a final answer. I think there's certainly a level of urgency on the community, the constituents' parts to get this done as fast as possible on a well thought out basis. But we certainly don't want to do it wrong. And I don't think there is a hard date that we have attached to the bill, but I assume we will get a push to, moving quickly along once the recommendations are actually in.
But October 1st is the date when you don't have the authority before October 1st of this year. So.
Correct. Yes. Thank you. That is the piece
That's good to know. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Do we have any other suggestions on signage and necessary adjustments? All right. All right, not hearing any. We are at the point of the agenda where we talk about the upcoming meetings and the upcoming report, and I am going to turn that over to Joel.
Right. So I think a lot of this is laid out. I think once we have the big item here is that we want to have that map done by the time that we meet again in February, where we can look at a draft of the report. So, the real work between.
I'm sorry, Joel. Wait a minute. Greg, you're still sharing your screen? There you go.
Nope, I'm not.
Okay.
Once we get back what Doug has done, DeAndrea, I think you and I can figure out how to chunk out that work, and the quadrant piece will probably make sense, but that we'll be able to finalize what we want to do with that once we have Doug's maps, and then bring everybody's feedback to the February meeting so that we can put those all together and finalize what that map should look like, because that is a central piece of the March report. I think the rest of it will be composed of a lot of the stuff that we've already done over the last few months. Certainly all those presentations on the areas of concern, the constituent feedback through the community survey, some of the areas of concern brought to us by Ron and and from other folks in the community. And I think that there is not a high-level policy recommendation going to be expected in this report. I think it really is going to be centered on the map and then what we've done and what we've learned so far. So I mean that is a summary piece, but really what we need from the work group is help with the map. And then the rest, I think, is something we can put into place. But we will try to get to you as early as possible so that if there are pieces that we've missed that you think should be included, we can make sure those get added in, or if you have suggestions ahead of time. But this will not be this is 100% what we should do. This is going to be a summary of work plus the map.
Sounds good. Does everybody fully understand what the next steps with the deliverables are going to be? Any questions about that? All right, hearing none. Do we have an idea about the upcoming next meeting, Joel? Or are you going to send something out on that?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think about a month from now, as we've been doing, is a good idea, unless Doug tells me that there's, again, I said before, I really don't know how long the work you do takes, Doug, so I don't want to be presumptive, but if you're able to turn something around to us in a week and a half, I think that gives that the rest of that month period for the work group to provide their input. I think that's a reasonable timetable, and also to get that first part of the report together. So I don't see any reason not to just continue a monthly plan and meet in mid-February.
Okay. Sounds good. And Joel, I appreciate that feedback about the report and the next meeting. I just wanted to make sure to also give you all a heads up about, the next phases of this work group. And of course, the next phases will be the cameras and the citation process, which, Captain, I'm sure that you're very interested in. And legally, what can we do as it relates to the citations, Crystal, from your perspective? And of course, Matt, what would it take from a cost perspective for these cameras and selecting the type of cameras that we're going to recommend to be out at these different locations, and how many cameras we actually recommend to be out at these different locations? So even though we've gotten over or we're close to a major hurdle with our first deliverable for March, we have some other subject matter experts on this work group, and I wanted to let you all know that your items are coming up within the next few months. So to give you all something to think about where we move to once we do our deliverable in March. All right. So with that being said, I'll do a roundtable and see if anybody has any comments about anything that we shared today or upcoming information that we need to share. If not, we can adjourn the meeting knowing what our next steps in front of us will be.
I would like to say one thing. Greg, are you still there? Greg Karsky?
Yes, sir.
Hi, Greg, Ron. Happy you're here. I'm very happy you're here. I know how knowledgeable you are, and I hope you come back because I may have a large concern about the truck traffic on Merritt Boulevard. You and I have talked about all the problems on Merritt Boulevard now from A to Z, so I'd
Yep.
like to have a discussion with you about that.
Anytime, Ron, anytime.
Okay.
Ron, thanks for taking that off my plate. I appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, you're welcome, Pete.
All right. So hearing no other questions or comments, I'm going to try to give y'all 20 minutes back on your Friday. And thank you all so much, Greg. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the work that you've done outside of the regular everyday stuff that you do for me at DPW. Thank you. I appreciate it. And you're going to come back to the next meeting too, Greg.
If I'm invited, I'll be here.
All right. Good to see you all. And thank you for your participation today. We will be reaching out to you in between now and February, and we'll see you again in February.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye.